and welcome to the Pathfinder Lair. My name is Drew, and I've been a game master of the Pathfinder system for years. On this channel, I help new players understand the rules of the Pathfinder 2 system. Today in the Lair, I will be continuing my Ancestry album series with the Gnome Ancestry. Yes, the little tinkers known as gnomes. That's what I'll be covering today. Let's start with the basics. As a gnome, you have 8 Ancestry hit points to start off with. You are a small creature. Also, like most Ancestries, you have a speed of 25 feet per action you take. For ability boosts, you get Constitution, because gnomes are harder than they look, and Charisma, because gnomes are very easy to get along with. They also get a free ability boost that can be anything but Constitution or Charisma. The ability flaw for gnomes is Strength, because gnomes tend to be less strong than other ancestries. For languages, gnomes get Common, Gnomish, and Sylvan. Sylvan is the language of Fae and other woodland creatures, for those of you that don't know. They also get additional languages equal to their intelligence modifier, if it's positive. As do all ancestries. There are suggestions for languages you could pick in the core rulebook, but really it's any language that you have access to, as determined by your GM. You have the gnome and humanoid traits and low light vision, which means you can see just as well in dim light as you can in bright light. Now let's talk about heritages, starting with the chameleon gnome. This heritage essentially means that each day your skin color changes, and if you happen to be in an area with a similar coloration, you can spend one action in order to make minor changes to your appearance to match the color of your surroundings. This gives you a +2 bonus to stealth checks until your surroundings change. This heritage is pretty situational, at least mechanically. It's a great roleplay heritage, but as for mechanics, it depends on your GM. Some GMs will rule that you get to pick which color you are each day, in which case this heritage is really good. Other GMs will rule that they get to pick which color you are each day because you don't control your dreams, and that is what your color is tied to. If this is the case, this heritage is really bad because the GM essentially decides whether or not you can even use it mechanically. Next we have the Fey-touched gnome. This heritage not only gives you the Fey trait, in addition to the gnome and humanoid traits, but also gives you any primal cantrip that you can cast as an innate spell at will, meaning as much as you want. This works like any other cantrip. What's even better is that once per day, by spending 10 minutes meditating, you can change the cantrip from this feat to a different one from the same list. This heritage is amazing. Not only do you get a primal cantrip, but being able to change it once per day is one of the best heritage abilities I've seen as of right now. Definitely consider this heritage if you are playing a gnome. The third heritage for gnomes is the Sensate gnome. This heritage gives you another sense. Imprecise sense at a range of 30 feet. This means that if a creature is within 30 feet, you can use your sense of smell to find them even if they're hidden from view. You gain a +2 circumstance bonus to perception checks when you are trying to find a creature that is within the range of your scent. This heritage is situational. You might use it, you might not. Depends on what your GM throws at you. Now let's talk about the Umbral Gnome. This is essentially the dark gnome of this game. You gain dark vision. Simple as that. Another situational heritage. Depends on how many dark places you run into. Lastly, for heritages, I will talk about the Wellspring Gnome. This is another amazing heritage. You essentially choose a cantrip from one of the lists besides Primal. So either Arcane, Divine, or Occult. You can cast that spell as an innate spell at will. Again, this works like any other cantrip. Whenever you gain a primal innate spell from an Ancestry feat, change its tradition from primal to the list that you chose for this heritage. Definitely consider this heritage if you are playing a gnome. Now let's move on to Ancestry feats, starting with first level. First we have Animal Accomplice. This feat gives you a familiar. I will cover more on familiars when I get to my familiars and animal companions video. This feat can be really good depending on what you use the familiar for. Second, we have the Burrow Occlusionist feats. This feat gives you the ability to ask questions, receive answers from, and even use the diplomacy skill on animals that have a burrow speed, such as badgers, moles, and prairie dogs. Your GM will determine what animals this feat works on. This feat is pretty situational. Depends on how many of these creatures you run into in the game you are playing. However, this feat does open up another feat that's really good as well. Next we have Fey Fellowship. This feat gives you a +2 circumstance bonus on perception checks and saving throws against Fey. Also, if you run into a Fey in a social situation, then you can make an immediate diplomacy check to make an impression on that Fey instead of having to converse for 1 minute. You take a -5 penalty on this check. If you fail, you can instead spend 1 minute conversing with the Fey in order to make a new check at the end of that time, rather than take your results. If you have the Glad Hand skill feat, which I will cover in my skill feats video, then you don't take the -5 penalty on your immediate diplomacy check. Pretty situational feats. Really depends on how many Fey you run into. Now let's talk about the First World Magic Gnome Ancestry feats. This feat gives you a cantrip from the Primal list. This works like any other cantrip you receive from an Ancestry feat. Very good Ancestry feat since you can choose any cantrip from the Primal list. Fifth, we have the Gnome Obsession first level Ancestry feat. With this feat, you pick a second lore skill in addition to the one you get from your background. You become trained in that lore skill. When you reach second level, you become an expert in both this lore skill and the one you get from your background, if any. At 7th level, you become a master in both lore skills, and when you reach level 15, you become legendary in both of these skills. This feat can be really good if you want specialized knowledge about specific subjects. Next up, we have Gnome Weapon Familiarity. This feat makes you trained in the glaive and the kukri. In addition, you gain access to all uncommon gnome weapons. For determining your proficiency, all martial gnome weapons are considered simple weapons for you, and all advanced gnome weapons are considered martial weapons for you. Very good feat, especially if your class doesn't get martial weapons normally. 7th, we have the Illusion Sense feat. This feat gives you a +1 bonus on perception checks and will saves against illusions. Also, anytime you come within 10 feet of an illusion, the GM will roll a secret check to determine if you disbelieve it, even if you don't spend an action attempting to disbelieve it. Very situational feat. Depends on how many illusions you run into. If you're running into a bunch of illusions, consider taking this feat. Otherwise, pick something else. Next we have the Empathetic Plea Ancestry feat. You must be trained in diplomacy in order to take this feat. This feat gives you a reaction with the following trigger. You are attacked by a creature that you haven't acted hostile towards. You must use this reaction before the creature makes its attack roll. Attempt a diplomacy check against the attacker's will DC, which is 10 plus their will save. On a critical success, the creature pulls its attack and it can't use hostile actions against you until the beginning of its next turn. On a success, the creature takes a -2 circumstance penalty on the triggering strike and all strikes against you until the beginning of its next turn. The penalty is -4 if you are an expert in diplomacy, -6 if you are a master, and -8 if you are legendary. On a failure, the creature's attack is unaffected and it is immune to this feat for 24 hours. If you are more of a support class like a bard, this can be a really good feat. Otherwise, maybe take something else. Lastly, for first level Ancestry feats, we have the Razzle Dazzle feats. You can use this feat once per hour as a free action when you blind or dazzle a creature. You extend the duration of the blinded or dazzled condition by 1 round. This can be a very good feat, but only if you use one or both of these conditions against enemies a lot. Otherwise, take something else. Now let's talk about 5th level Ancestry feats, starting with Animal Occlusionist. You must have the Burrow Occlusionist Ancestry feat to take this feat. You can speak with all animals, not just those with a burrow speed. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus on checks to make an impression on animals. There are animals all over the place in this game, so this is an excellent out-of-combat feat. Next is Energized Font. In order to take this feat, you must have a focus pool, and you must have at least one innate spell from a Gnome Heritage or Ancestry feat that matches the tradition of at least one of your focus spells. You can use this feat once per day for 1 action. You regain 1 focus point up to your usual maximum. This feat can be really good if you use your focus spells a lot. Third is Gnome Weapon Innovator. You must have the Gnome Weapon Familiarity Ancestry feat in order to take this feat. When you critically hit using a glaive, kukri, or gnome weapon, you apply the weapon's critical specialization effect. I'll talk more about this when I get to my weapons video. This can be a very good feat, especially if your class doesn't get critical specialization effects normally. Lastly, for 5th level Ancestry feats, we have Project Persona. This feat allows you to make your armor look like regular clothing. The statistics of your armor don't change. This effect lasts for as long as you are conscious and wearing the armor. A creature can disbelieve the illusion by seeking or by touching the armor. The DC equals your will DC. Now let's talk about Gnome 9th level Ancestry feats, starting with First World Adept. In order to take this feat, you must have at least 1 primal innate spell. You gain Fairy Fire and Invisibility as 2nd level primal innate spells. You can cast each of these spells once a day. Next we have the Vivacious Conduit feat. If you rest for 10 minutes, you regain hit points equal to your Constitution modifier times half your level. This is in addition to any healing you receive from the medicine skill. This feat could mean the difference between life and death. Being able to heal yourself just by resting for 10 minutes is huge. And if you combine it with the medicine skill, it becomes even better. Third, we have the Cautious Curiosity feat. In order to take this feat, you must have at least 1 arcane or occult spell gained from a Gnome Heritage or Ancestry feats. You gain Misdirection and Silence as 2nd level arcane or occult innate spells. The tradition of these spells must match that of your Gnome Ancestry options. You can cast each of these spells once per day and can only target yourself. Now you may be thinking, Why would I want to cast silence on myself? Then I can't cast any of my spells. What you may not realize is that by casting silence on yourself, no one can hear you. This makes both spells from this feat excellent for rogues, especially Thief Racket rogues. I will cover more on this when I get to my rogue videos. In fact, the only reason that this feat isn't completely broken for rogues is that as innate spells, you can't cast them at higher spell levels, and you can only cast them once per day. Lastly, for 9th level Ancestry feats, we have the Life Leap feat. In order to use this feat, you must be adjacent to a living creature. This feat requires you to use one of your 3 actions. You pass through said living creature. You move from your current location to another location still adjacent to that creature, but on the opposite side or corner of that creature's space. To determine if a location is valid, use the same rules that you would for flanking, covered in my combat video at a later date. This movement does not trigger reactions based on movements. You must be able to see your destination, and you can't move any farther than your speed would allow in one action. Next we have 13th level feats for the Gnome. Let's start with Gnome Weapon Expertise. In order to take this feat, you must have the Gnome Weapon Familiarity feats. Whenever your class grants you expert or greater proficiency in any weapon, you also gain that proficiency with all gnome weapons. Can be a very good feat, just depends on your class. Lastly, for 13th level feats, we have Instinctive Obfuscation. At least I think that's how you pronounce that. In order to take this feat, you must have at least one arcane or occult spell gained from a gnome heritage or ancestry feat, and you can use this feat once per day. This feat gives you a reaction with the trigger. You are attacked by a foe. You gain the effects of a mirror image spell, but with 2 images instead of 3. The tradition of this action matches the tradition of your gnome ancestry options. Before I wrap up this video, I want to talk about the 17th level gnome ancestry feat. It is called Homeward Bound. You gain Plane Shift as a primal innate spell that you can cast twice per week. You can only use this to travel back and forth between the first world and the material plane. You can act as a spell focus, and you don't need a tuning fork. And that's the end of this video. If this video helped you, don't forget to subscribe for more Pathfinder 2nd Edition tutorial videos. If you're already subscribed, go ahead and hit that bell to be alerted of new episodes. If you want to learn more about other ancestries, check out these videos. Also, if you have any questions, be sure to check out the Pathfinder Lair Facebook group. Link in the description. Next week, I will be continuing my Ancestry album series with goblins. And until next time, let's play some Pathfinder.
1, 2, 3.